The rancher rescued an Apache woman from bandits. By law, he had to marry her. John McAllister was not a man who sought excitement. He had lived his whole life on the wide, open plains of Arizona, where the sun painted the hills gold in the morning and set them ablaze in the evening. His days were filled with the steady rhythm of ranch life, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and riding across the rolling hills to check on his grazing herds. The work was hard, but John liked it that way. He loved the quiet, the open sky, and the feeling of freedom that came with living far from the crowded towns. On one bright morning, John saddled his horse, a strong bay stallion named Thunder, and rode out to inspect the northern pasture. He liked this part of his land the most, because the hills rolled in gentle waves, dotted with juniper and mesquite trees, and he could see for miles. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful for a man like John, who had always believed that calm often hid danger. As he rode along a narrow dirt trail, John noticed something unusual in the distance. A cloud of dust was rising from the trail near the edge of the canyon. At first, he thought it might be a herd of deer or some wandering cattle, but as he drew closer, he saw that it was not animals at all. A small group of men were riding roughly, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. They were surrounding someone, a young woman, struggling to break free. John's heart quickened. He had seen trouble before, bandits and thieves passing through the territory, but he had never encountered such violence up close. Without thinking twice, he spurred Thunder forward, galloping as fast as the stallion could go. The sound of hooves pounding the earth echoed through the canyon, and the men looked up, startled. "Hey, leave her alone!" John shouted as he rode into the fray. His voice was loud and firm, carrying over the noise of the wind and the horses. The bandits turned to face him, their eyes narrowing, hands reaching for weapons. But John was ready. He had grown up handling rifles and pistols, and he knew that courage and determination often counted for more than numbers. The young woman struggled against the men, her long, dark hair flowing in the wind. She looked terrified, her eyes wide and desperate. John could see that she was smaller than the men surrounding her, but there was a fire in her gaze that showed she would not give up without a fight. Her bravery struck John, and he felt the surge of determination. He would not let these men harm her. John raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack echoed through the canyon, and the bandits hesitated. He did not aim to kill, only to scare them, to show that he would not back down. "I said leave her alone," he shouted again, riding closer. Thunder's hooves thundered on the rocky ground, and the young woman grabbed a loose branch, using it to fend off one of the attackers. The bandits, realizing that John was not a man to be easily intimidated, began to scatter. Two of them turned and fled, while the others struggled to control their horses. With a final push, John rode between the young woman and the remaining men, keeping them at a distance until they finally turned and disappeared over the ridge. Breathing heavily, John finally slowed Thunder to a walk. He turned to the young woman, who was trembling, clutching her dress, and staring at him with a mixture of fear and relief. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "It's over now."
"You're safe," she nodded slowly, still catching her breath.
"Oh, thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft but steady, and John could see the gratitude in her eyes. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." John offered her his hand to help her onto the horse. "You're going to be all right," he said. "We should get you somewhere safe." The woman hesitated for a moment, then carefully climbed onto the horse behind him. He could feel her tense body, and he realized how exhausted she must be after the struggle. As they rode back toward John's ranch, he tried to make small talk, but the woman was quiet, her eyes scanning the horizon nervously. John understood. She had been through a terrifying ordeal, and it would take time for her to feel safe again. The canyon grew smaller behind them as they approached the familiar fences and buildings of the ranch. The smell of hay, earth, and cattle filled the air, grounding them both in the safety of home. When they arrived at the ranch, John led Thunder into the corral and helped the woman dismount. She looked around at the simple wooden buildings, the grazing cattle, and the wide fields, and for the first time she allowed herself a small, cautious smile. This is your home?" she asked. "Yes," John replied. "It's not much, but it's safe, and you can stay here as long as you need." He had never had a guest like this before, and he did not know what the future held. But he knew one thing: he could not leave her alone in the wilderness. She had been through enough danger for one lifetime. The woman's name, he soon learned, was Naeli. She was an Apache woman, traveling with her people when the bandits had attacked. John had never met an Apache person before, but he had heard stories of their strength, intelligence, and resilience. Naeli embodied all of these qualities, and he found himself admiring her quietly, even as he worried for her safety. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, John set out a simple meal of bread, cheese, and water for Naeli. She accepted it silently, her eyes still wary but filled with a quiet trust. They ate together in the warm glow of the setting sun, and for the first time since the attack, Naeli allowed herself to relax, if only a little. That night, as John tended to his chores and the stars emerged one by one in the clear sky, he thought about what had just happened. He had acted without hesitation, guided by instinct and a sense of duty. He had no idea what the law might say about rescuing someone in this territory, but he knew he had done the right thing. And as he glanced toward the small cabin where Naeli rested, he realized that life on the ranch had suddenly changed. A stranger, a woman from a different world, was now under his care, and somehow he knew their lives would never be the same again. After that first terrifying encounter, life on John McAllister's ranch should have returned to its usual calm, but nothing remained the same. Naeli, the young Apache woman he had rescued, now stayed in the small cabin near the main house. Every movement she made reminded John of the danger she had narrowly escaped, and he became aware of the heavy responsibility resting on his shoulders. He had saved her life, but he also had to make sure she felt safe, respected, and understood in a world so different from the one she had known. At first, communication was difficult. Naeli spoke only a few words of English, and John knew almost nothing of her language. They relied on gestures, expressions, and patient repetition. Every day, John tried to teach her simple words, pointing to objects and saying their names, while Naeli responded with careful attention, slowly repeating the words herself. It was frustrating at times for both of them, but each small success felt like a victory. "Water," John would say, holding a cup. Naeli would nod, sometimes smiling, her dark eyes bright with understanding. "Eat bread," he said, and she would take the small pieces he offered, learning not only the words but the kindness behind them. This simple act of sharing food became a bridge between them, a way to connect without words. John also learned about Naeli's customs and traditions. Little by little, she explained through gestures and drawings in the dirt, the songs her people sang, the stories of the land, and the importance of family and community. He listened with respect, fascinated by her strength and the wisdom in her tales. He realized that she had grown up in a life very different from his own, where survival and courage were lessons learned from birth. But as days turned into weeks, John began to understand that his actions had deeper consequences than he first imagined. In this part of the territory, a strange law existed. Any man who rescued a woman from kidnapping or captivity was legally obliged to marry her. It was a law that most outsiders had never heard of, and it startled John when the local sheriff visited him one morning to explain it. "You saved her life," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "And by the law, she is now your responsibility. You must marry her." John's eyebrows rose in surprise. He had never imagined that a good deed could come with such a demand. "Marry her? But I barely know her," John replied, trying to keep his voice calm. The sheriff only nodded, as if the answer were obvious. Naeli, of course, could not speak the law in English, but she understood enough to sense the seriousness of the conversation. Her face was calm, though her eyes betrayed a mixture of fear and confusion. John tried to reassure her, speaking slowly. "The law, people, say we
must be together. I
will protect you." She nodded faintly, still unsure what the future would bring. Despite the legal obligation, John refused to treat Naeli as if she were merely a duty. He continued to respect her freedom, asking her permission for daily tasks, involving her in decisions about the ranch, and always giving her space when she wanted it. Slowly, a bond began to grow, built not on law, but on respect, trust, and shared experience. Life on the ranch was hard work, and both John and Naeli found themselves occupied from sunrise to sunset. She learned quickly, helping with chores around the cattle, fetching water, and preparing simple meals. At first her movements were hesitant and cautious, but John noticed a growing confidence in her actions. She had survived the bandits after all, and her resilience shone through in every task she attempted. John admired her strength more each day. It was not just her physical endurance, but her intelligence, her ability to assess a situation calmly, and her courage in the face of danger. He began to realize that she was no ordinary woman. She was someone who had faced hardship before meeting him, someone capable of surviving the harshest of circumstances. And yet, despite her bravery, he also saw the moments when she was afraid, when she looked at the horizon nervously, as if expecting danger to return. One afternoon, as they worked to repair a broken fence, John noticed Naeli pause and look toward the hills. "What is it?" he asked. She pointed to a distant trail where dust swirled in the distance. John tensed. Bandits? Another threat? But as they watched, a small group of travelers appeared. Settlers, cautious but harmless, carrying supplies and greetings. Naeli relaxed, and John felt a wave of relief. Still, the sight reminded them both that the world beyond the ranch was unpredictable, and that their safety depended on vigilance and cooperation. In these moments, John realized that their relationship was evolving. At first, it had been purely a matter of survival and obligation. He had rescued Naeli, and by law, he was bound to her. But now he saw something deeper forming, a quiet friendship built on trust and mutual respect. They laughed together over small mistakes, shared quiet moments during the long evenings, and found comfort in each other's company, even when words failed them. Naeli, too, began to trust John more fully. She could sense that he would never harm her, that he valued her as a person and not merely as a legal responsibility. She started to share more of her thoughts through gestures, drawings, and the few words she knew in English. In time, they developed a simple language of their own, a combination of speech, gestures, and understanding that made communication easier. Yet, despite these moments of connection, the shadow of the law still loomed over them. John could not ignore the fact that their bond was formed under unusual circumstances, and Naeli had no real choice in the matter. He struggled with this reality, questioning whether it was fair to her, whether he could truly honor both the law and her freedom. He decided that the only way forward was through respect, patience, and kindness, and he made a promise to himself that he would never force her into anything against her will. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch continued to thrive. John and Nayeli adapted to their new routine, their partnership strengthening with each shared task. She learned how to ride Thunder more confidently, how to help herd cattle, and even how to use simple tools for repairs around the ranch. In turn, John learned to appreciate her skills, her keen observations, and her quiet strength. Together, they became a team, complementing each other in ways that neither had expected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, John and Nayeli sat outside the cabin, sharing a quiet meal. The air was calm, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant cattle. John looked at Nayeli and realized how far they had come since that first day in the canyon. She was no longer the frightened woman he had rescued. She was a partner, a friend, and someone whose presence brought a sense of completeness to his life. Nayeli, looking at John, felt a similar change. At first, she had seen him as a stranger, a man forced into her life by the law. Now she recognized him as a protector, a teacher, and someone who respected her for who she was. Though their future was uncertain, she felt safe in his presence, and for the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to hope. That night, as the stars shone bright over the ranch, John and Nayeli went to sleep in the cabin, each aware of the law that connected them, but also of the trust and respect that had grown between them. The world outside was still dangerous, and challenges would come, but for now, they had found a fragile peace, a sense of safety, and the beginning of a partnership that neither could have predicted. And so, life continued on the ranch. Every day brought new challenges, small victories, and moments of connection. John McAllister and Nayeli discovered that survival was more than just protecting each other from danger. It was about understanding, patience, and learning to live together with respect. Though the law had brought them together, it was their courage, kindness, and willingness to trust that began to form the foundation of something far greater than obligation. Life on the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm, but John McAllister knew that peace was often fragile in the Arizona territory. The wide-open plains, the hills, and the canyons held beauty, yes, but they also hid dangers. Even as John and Nayeli learned to live together and trust each other, John remained vigilant. He had rescued her once, and he would not allow anything to threaten her again. One early morning, as the sun rose behind the distant mountains, John noticed a subtle change in the air. There was a restless movement in the cattle, and a faint cloud of dust rose on the horizon. His instincts, honed from years on the ranch, told him that something was wrong. He spurred Thunder into a trot, urging Nayeli to hold on as he guided her to a safe spot near the barn. She was frightened, clutching the sides of the horse, but John reassured her with a firm, calm voice. "Stay close. Trust me. We will be all right." As they approached the dust cloud, John could make out figures moving quickly on horseback. They were not friendly settlers or travelers. They were bandits, the same kind of men who had attacked Nayeli before. Their intent was clear. They wanted to seize her again, perhaps for ransom or revenge. John's heart pounded, but he forced himself to think clearly. He could not allow fear to control him, not when Nayeli's life depended on his courage and quick thinking. He guided Thunder back to the ranch, taking a hidden path through the hills that only he knew. The bandits were fast, but John used the terrain to his advantage, moving through narrow gullies and rocky trails where the larger men and their horses could not follow easily. Nayeli, though terrified, began to understand that John was skilled, that he knew the land and how to use it to protect them both. Her fear slowly gave way to admiration, and a quiet trust grew between them stronger than before. Once they reached the safety of the ranch, John moved quickly to secure the perimeter. He knew the bandits would not give up easily. He barricaded doors, double-checked the gates, and positioned the ranch hands where they could observe the surrounding hills. Nayeli helped as best she could, fetching water, preparing food, and even assisting with small repairs to fences. It was hard work, but it kept their minds busy and their spirits focused. That night, as the stars lit the sky, John and Nayeli sat together outside the cabin. The air was cool, the night quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves. They talked softly, as much as they could with their limited shared language. John drew pictures in the dirt to explain his plan for the next day, and Nayeli responded with gestures, showing she understood and could help. It was not perfect communication, but it was enough. They had developed a rhythm, a way of working together that gave them strength. The following days were tense. John knew the bandits could return at any moment, and he prepared accordingly. He trained Nayeli in small, practical ways, how to recognize signs of danger, how to move quietly, and how to use the terrain to their advantage. It was not about fighting. It was about survival, awareness, and staying safe. Nayeli learned quickly, absorbing every lesson with determination and courage. John admired her bravery and resilience. She had survived attacks before, and now she faced the challenge of defending herself and the ranch alongside him. Despite the looming danger, moments of humanity and connection shone through. During breaks in their vigilance, John and Nayeli would sit by the creek that ran near the ranch, letting the cool water run through their hands and sharing quiet moments of laughter and curiosity. Nayeli showed John how to identify plants and herbs, some used for healing, others for cooking. John taught her how to mend fences and care for the cattle. These exchanges were more than practical. They were a way of learning to trust and rely on each other fully. As days turned into weeks, John noticed a change in himself. The law had forced him into this relationship, but the bond he now felt with Nayeli was growing beyond obligation. He began to care for her deeply, not just as a person he had rescued, but as someone whose courage and spirit inspired him. Nayeli, too, began to see John not only as a protector, but as a partner, someone who respected her and treated her as an equal. The beginnings of friendship, trust, and perhaps something deeper were taking root, quietly but firmly. One afternoon, while checking the northern pasture, John spotted another sign of trouble. Tracks in the dirt, fresh tracks, showed that someone had been near the ranch recently. The bandits had returned, more determined than before. John did not panic. Instead, he planned carefully. He would not confront them in a reckless way. He would use his knowledge of the land and his experience to outsmart them. Nayeli watched closely, absorbing every decision, every move, learning how to navigate danger with skill and patience. That evening, the bandits made their move, attempting to sneak onto the property under the cover of darkness. John and Nayeli were ready. Using clever traps and signals they had prepared, they detected the intruders before the men could reach the main buildings. John's strategy was to avoid confrontation while protecting the ranch and Nayeli. The bandits, frustrated and unable to reach their target, eventually fled, realizing they had underestimated John and his knowledge of the land. The victory was quiet but meaningful. John and Nayeli knew that danger would always be present in the territory, but they also knew that together they could face it. That shared experience, facing danger side by side, deepened the bond between them. It was no longer just a law that connected them. It was mutual trust, respect, and the knowledge that they could rely on each other in the harshest circumstances. In the weeks that followed, John and Nayeli continued to work together. building their home and strengthening the ranch. They repaired fences, tended to cattle, and planted a small garden. Every task was an opportunity to learn from each other, to grow closer, and to create a life that was theirs despite the uncertainties of the world around them. John admired Naeli's determination and intelligence, and she respected his patience, skill, and kindness. One day, as they rested after a long morning of work, Naeli began to draw pictures in the dirt, telling stories of her life before the bandits had attacked. John listened with fascination, learning about her family, her community, and the land she had once called home. He realized how much strength it took for her to survive alone, to continue moving forward despite the dangers she had faced. He felt a deep respect for her, knowing that her courage was matched only by her wisdom and heart. Through all of this, John began to understand a simple truth. Life was unpredictable, often dangerous, but also filled with moments of beauty and connection. Rescuing Naeli had brought them together, but it was their shared experiences, their ability to face challenges together, that was truly shaping their lives. The law might have brought them under the same roof, but trust, respect, and courage were what would define their future. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, John and Naeli sat on a hill overlooking the ranch. The land stretched for miles, peaceful and alive, a place of both challenge and opportunity. They did not speak much, but their shared silence was comfortable. Each knew that the other understood the risks, the responsibilities, and the bond that had grown between them. John realized that their journey was far from over. The territory was full of dangers, and the world outside the ranch was unpredictable. Yet, he felt a sense of calm knowing that Naeli was by his side, that they had learned to trust each other, and that they had the skills and courage to face whatever might come. Naeli, looking at the horizon, felt the same quiet confidence. She had survived once, learned to trust, and discovered that strength and courage could come from unexpected places. That night, under the vast Arizona sky filled with stars, John and Naeli went to sleep knowing that they were no longer simply protector and rescued. They were partners, facing the challenges of life together. They understood that danger could return at any moment, but they also knew that the bond they had formed through trust, respect, and shared experience would help them endure whatever lay ahead. And so, life on the ranch continued. Every day was a new lesson, a new opportunity, and a chance to strengthen the connection between John and Naeli. What had begun as a rescue under law had grown into a partnership, built on courage, understanding, and the quiet promise that neither would face the challenges of the world alone again. The calm they had built on the ranch was about to be tested in ways John and Naeli had never imagined. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the distant hills and bathed the fields in soft gold, John noticed signs that something was wrong. The cattle were restless, shifting uneasily, and the wind carried a faint, unsettling sound. It was not the gentle whistle of birds or the rustle of leaves. It was the noise of horses coming closer. John's heart sank. He had prepared for trouble before, but now he felt a chill of dread. He turned to Naeli, who was gathering water near the creek. Her dark eyes met his, and without words, they both understood the warning. Danger was approaching. John quickly guided her toward the cabin, taking the safest hidden path through the hills. Naeli moved silently, her trust in John evident, yet she could not hide her fear. She had survived once, but the thought of facing such terror again made her tremble. By the time they reached the cabin, John could see the bandits approaching from the ridge. This time there were more of them, and they seemed organized, confident, and angry. They had clearly returned for revenge, determined to take what they had failed to seize before. John knew that negotiation was impossible, These men would not be swayed by words or reason. They had only one goal: to capture Nayeli again. John quickly assessed the situation. He could not let them reach the main buildings, nor could he allow Nayeli to be endangered. He ran to the barn, gathering tools and materials to fortify their defenses. Nayeli, understanding the urgency, helped as best she could. Together they stacked barrels and crates, prepared ropes, and even created small noise traps, anything that could give them an advantage. Their movements were quick, practiced, and careful. Every action counted. As the bandits drew closer, John realized that the confrontation was inevitable. He remembered the first time he had rescued Nayeli, and he knew that he could not allow history to repeat itself. He had to protect her, but he also wanted to minimize the risk of anyone getting hurt. His mind raced, thinking of ways to outsmart the intruders while keeping both himself and Nayeli safe. The bandits reached the outer fence, shouting and brandishing sticks and ropes. John stood ready, watching their movements, calculating every step. Nayeli stayed close behind him, her hands gripping his arm. She was frightened, yes, but she was also calm in a way that surprised John. She had learned from him, and she had learned from her own past experiences. She would not panic, not when it mattered most. Using the knowledge of the land and the ranch, John led the bandits on a chase, moving from one area to another while keeping the main buildings and Nayeli safe. He used narrow paths, hidden gullies, and rocky outcrops to slow them down. The bandits, frustrated and unprepared for such strategy, began to lose their confidence. John could see that they were not invincible. They could be outsmarted if he was careful and patient. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, and the heat made the chase exhausting. John and Nayeli worked together seamlessly, signaling to each other with gestures, guiding each other through difficult terrain, and keeping a constant watch on the bandits' movements. Nayeli's quick thinking saved them more than once, whether it was noticing a hidden path or alerting John to a potential trap. John realized that her bravery and intelligence were just as important as his own strength and skill. By late afternoon, the bandits were exhausted, their horses tired, and their energy depleted. John led them into a natural canyon where their escape routes were limited. Using careful planning, he had positioned logs and rocks to block paths and created obstacles that slowed them down further. The bandits, realizing that they were trapped, hesitated, unsure how to proceed. John took this moment to speak, his voice calm but firm. "This is your last chance. Leave now and never return," he said. Nayeli stood beside him, her presence a quiet statement of unity. The bandits glared at them but could see that John's determination was unshakable. They had underestimated him, underestimated the land, and underestimated the bond between John and Nayeli. Slowly, reluctantly, they decided to retreat, knowing that they could not win.
When the danger finally passed, John and Nayeli returned to the ranch, exhausted but relieved.
The threat was over for now, but both knew that life in the territory would always hold uncertainty. They had faced a moment that could have destroyed them, and yet they had survived. That survival forged a bond stronger than any law could dictate. It was a bond built on courage, trust, and mutual respect. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink, John and Nayeli sat outside the cabin, leaning against a tree. Their hands touched briefly, a silent acknowledgement of what they had endured. Nayeli looked at John, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude, relief, and a quiet admiration. John, in turn, felt a deep respect and affection for her courage and resilience. They spoke little that night, but words were not needed. The silence carried understanding, a shared recognition of the dangers they had faced, and the strength they had discovered in each other. They had learned that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. They had learned that trust was earned in moments of trial, and that respect grew from patience, understanding, and shared experience. Over the following days, John and Nayeli worked to repair any damage to the ranch and reinforce their defenses. They added extra fencing, strengthened the cabin, and created lookout points on the hills. Every improvement was a reminder of the danger they had faced and their determination to protect their home. Nayeli's confidence grew with each task, and John admired her ability to remain composed and effective under pressure. As the weeks passed, life on the ranch returned to a cautious normal. John and Nayeli continued to work together, tending to the cattle, maintaining the fences, and improving their home. But the memory of that intense confrontation remained vivid in their minds. It was a reminder of the dangers outside, yes, but also of their own strength and resilience. They had faced fear together, and in doing so they had forged a bond that went beyond law, beyond obligation. One afternoon, while working in the garden, Nayeli shared more stories of her life before the bandits had attacked. John listened intently, fascinated by her tales of family, community, and the land she had loved. These stories gave him a deeper understanding of her world, and he realized how much courage it had taken for her to survive and adapt to such a harsh, unpredictable life. He felt a profound respect for her, recognizing that her strength was as much mental and emotional as it was physical. John began to see their future differently. The law had brought them together, yes, but it was their shared experiences, their ability to face danger and overcome it together, that was shaping their connection. He began to hope, not just for survival, but for something deeper, a life built on mutual trust, respect, and perhaps even friendship or love. Nayeli, too, began to see John as more than a rescuer or protector. She saw his kindness, his patience, and his unwavering courage. Slowly, she allowed herself to imagine a life of stability and partnership, despite the uncertainties of the world outside the ranch. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the fields, John and Nayeli stood together on the hill overlooking the ranch. The land stretched endlessly before them, beautiful, dangerous, and full of opportunity. They both understood that challenges would continue to come, that danger could return at any moment. But they also knew something more important. They were not facing the world alone. They had each other, a bond forged in danger, strengthened by trust, and built on respect. That night, as the stars appeared in the clear Arizona sky, John and Nayeli rested in the cabin, exhausted but at peace. They had survived the hardest trial yet, and though the future remained uncertain, they had discovered an unspoken truth. Courage, trust, and partnership could overcome even the most frightening dangers. Their lives had changed irrevocably, but in that change they found strength, hope, and a sense of connection that neither had anticipated. And so, as the ranch grew quiet under the vast night sky, John and Nayeli knew that they had faced their hardest moment together, and they had endured. It was a turning point, a moment that defined not just their survival, but the foundation of the life they would continue to build side by side. Life on the ranch had changed forever. John McAllister and Nayeli had survived the attacks, faced danger together, and learned to trust one another in ways neither had expected. The law had brought them together, but their experiences, their courage, and their growing respect for each other had created a bond far stronger than any legal obligation. Now, as the days unfolded, they began to shape a life together that was built not on duty alone, but on understanding, care, and partnership. The mornings were peaceful again. The sun rose over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields where cattle grazed quietly. John would saddle Thunder and ride out to check the fences, while Naeli worked in the garden or tended to the small herd of cattle near the cabin. They had found a rhythm, a routine that allowed both of them to contribute and to feel useful, valued, and respected. Each day, their partnership grew stronger, not just through work, but through the shared moments that made life richer. Nayeli had grown confident in ways she had never imagined. She could ride across the open plains, guide the cattle, and even spot signs of danger long before John did. Her experience, her intelligence, and her courage made her not just a helper, but an equal partner in every sense. John admired her constantly. He saw the strength in her every action, the careful way she approached tasks, the attention she paid to detail, and the calm determination she carried, even in the face of uncertainty. He knew he had never met anyone quite like her, and he felt a deep respect and affection for her that went far beyond their initial circumstances. Over time, John and Nayeli also began to share more about their pasts. By drawing in the dirt or speaking in the few words of English Nayeli knew, they learned about each other's families, childhoods, and dreams. John told stories of his life on the ranch, of the struggles to keep it running and the joys of watching the land thrive. Nayeli shared stories of her people, the customs and traditions she loved, and the lessons her parents had taught her about survival, respect, and courage. Listening to her, John felt a new appreciation for the richness of her culture and the wisdom she carried. Lessons that he now realized could help him become not just a better rancher, but a better person. The bond between them grew naturally, like the plants in Nayeli's garden. They celebrated small victories together, fixing a fence, successfully driving a herd of cattle, or even managing to trap a stubborn calf that had wandered off. They shared quiet moments in the evenings, sitting outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky with brilliant colors, and talking about the future in the ways they could. Words were sometimes limited, but laughter, gestures, and shared experience spoke volumes. One day, as they were mending a section of fence near the northern pasture, John paused and looked at Nayeli. She was working with a quiet focus, her hands skillful and sure. He realized that the girl he had first rescued from bandits was no longer the same person. She had transformed into a strong, capable woman, someone he could rely on, respect, and admire. Nayeli, noticing his gaze, smiled faintly. It was a smile full of trust, appreciation, and perhaps a hint of affection. John felt a warmth in his chest, an understanding that their bond had grown into something rare and valuable, a partnership of equals. But life on the ranch was not without challenges. Nature itself tested their resilience. Droughts threatened the cattle, sudden storms could damage fences and homes, and wild animals sometimes wandered too close to the fields. Yet, each challenge became an opportunity to work together, to rely on the other's strengths, and to face adversity with determination. John learned to trust Nayeli's instincts, and she relied on his experience and knowledge of the land. In every problem they solved, their bond deepened, built on mutual respect, patience, and a shared desire to protect their home and each other. Neighbors and travelers began to take notice of the unique partnership on the ranch. Word spread of the rancher who had rescued an Apache woman and honored her presence, not as a duty, but as a valued partner. Some were curious, some skeptical, but most were quietly impressed by how well John and Nayeli worked together. The story of their survival and teamwork began to inspire others, showing that courage, respect, and cooperation could overcome challenges that once seemed impossible. As the months turned into a year, John and Nayeli established a stable, productive life. They expanded the garden, built stronger shelters for the animals, and even started small projects to make daily work easier and more efficient. Every improvement was a testament to their teamwork and growing understanding of each other. Nayeli's skills continued to flourish, and John was proud to see how much she had adapted, learning new techniques for ranch work while also sharing the knowledge she had grown up with. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, John and Nayeli sat together on the porch of the cabin. Thunder grazed nearby, the cattle settled quietly in the fields, and the ranch seemed peaceful and secure. John looked at Nayeli, thinking of the journey they had shared, from the terrifying day in the canyon to the countless trials that followed. He realized how much their lives had changed. What had begun as a legal obligation had transformed into a genuine connection, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Nayeli turned to him and smiled. It was a smile that carried years of history, struggle, courage, and hope. In her eyes, John could see trust, admiration, and something deeper. A bond that was no longer just about survival or law, but about life, partnership, and a shared future. He felt the same way. He understood that their lives were intertwined not because of duty, but because of the experiences they had endured together, the challenges they had overcome, and the respect and care they had developed for one another. In the days that followed, their partnership continued to grow stronger. They made decisions together, celebrated small achievements, and comforted each other during moments of frustration or doubt. Their bond was tested by weather, work, and occasional minor threats, but each challenge only reinforced the connection they had built. John and Nayeli learned that life was not about avoiding danger or difficulty, but about facing it together with courage, patience, and understanding. Eventually, John realized that his feelings for Nayeli went beyond admiration and respect. He cared for her deeply, valuing her not only as a partner in work and survival, but as a person whose presence brought joy and meaning to his life. Nayeli, too, recognized that John's dedication, kindness, and courage had earned her trust and affection. What had started as a rescue under law had evolved into a genuine connection, one based on mutual respect, shared experience, and the promise of a life built together. Their story, once defined by danger and uncertainty, now became a story of hope and resilience. John and Nayeli had faced the harshest elements of nature, the threats of men who wished them harm, and the challenge of bridging two very different worlds. Yet through it all, they had discovered that partnership, trust, and understanding could overcome even the most difficult obstacles. They had learned that courage was not just about facing danger, but about opening one's heart, respecting another, and working together to build a life worth living. As the years passed, the ranch thrived under their careful stewardship. The land, once wild and unpredictable, became a place of stability, growth, and shared achievement. John and Nayeli continued to work side by side, teaching each other, learning from one another, and facing every challenge as a team. Their bond grew deeper with every passing day, rooted in respect, trust, and the experiences that had brought them together. In the quiet moments, they often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the terrifying day in the canyon to the long hours of work, moments of danger, and countless lessons learned together, they had created something rare and meaningful. Their lives were intertwined not by law alone, but by courage, friendship, and the understanding that the strongest bonds are forged in trust and shared experience. And so, under the vast Arizona sky, John McAllister and Nayeli built a life together that was rich in purpose, love, and partnership. They had survived danger, learned from each other, and discovered that true strength comes not from facing challenges alone, but from standing together. Their story became one of inspiration, showing that respect, courage, and trust could turn an unexpected meeting into a lifetime of shared achievement and happiness. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky with brilliant colors, John and Nayeli stood together, looking out over the land they had nurtured, They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and they had endured. In that endurance, they found not only safety and survival, but a connection that would last a lifetime, a bond that began with a rescue and grew into something far more meaningful: trust, respect, and a life built together, side by side.